Welcome everyone to episode 3 of MUPLore. We've got an exciting lineup in this episode. We're going to be talking to Eddie and Steve in the UK about their all-up 10,000 point narrative battle between the Ratkin and the Orcs. And we're going to be listening to Danny as he wonderfully brings their story to life for us. Checking in with Dave at Pannithor Wiki to find out long-lost knowledge about the Ratkin and Orcs. And finally, we're going to be talking to Jats in Australia about his upcoming Kings of War ambush tournament with a narrative twist where there's a civil war brewing between the North and the South. So sit back, relax, and let the show commence.
Welcome, wanderers, as we gaze into the mists of the MUPLore stone and discover the famous or forgotten fables of the known universes. Let me introduce your guide.
Good morning, everyone. This is Walt, and today is going to be a really exciting little chat. And we're going to be talking about Orcs, and we're going to talk about Ratkin. And I have a love for both of them, so I'm going to be quite divided in my feelings about this. Eddie and Steve just had a 5,000 point narrative game battle. I mean, can you just imagine that? 5,000 points. So let's talk to Eddie and Steve. Hey, g'day, Eddie. G'day, Steve. How are we doing over there?
Good, thank you, Walt.
I suppose for those people who really don't know, whereabouts are you located? Who shall I start with? Are we going to do this in alphabetical order all the time, Eddie and Steve? I mean, I don't want you, Steve. I don't want you to feel out of it. Is that okay?
That's fine. Go with that. Go with that.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please, and where you're located, because everybody knows I'm in Australia and early in the morning here, and I think it's very late at night where you are. So
it is. It's very late at night. We're over in Bristol in the UK, which is kind of at the top of the southwest.
Aside from the narrative, what the hell was going through your minds with 5,000 point battle? What caused that to happen? Did you both go to the pub and get drunk one night and go, hey, let's have a 5,000 point battle? What happened there? What was going through your minds?
Now, I've got to take the blame for that. We do a lot of tournaments. We go along, playing a lot of tournament games and stuff like that. And we're always playing practice games and stuff. And we just got to a situation where we had a bit of a period before our next event. And I said to Ed, it was coming back from a tournament, I think it was. And we said, well, instead of doing some tournament practice for the next couple of times we play at club, let's just have a big game. We got the time to do it. You know what I mean? We got the models, because I've got a slightly large collection, so we say. And I knew Ed's rats we're getting to a decent level as well. So yeah, let's just do it.
And what about you, Eddie? What did you think? Right?
No, it's great. I think over the last few years, so I've been playing for about 4 years now, and I think most years me and Steve have had a game where it's been like 3,000, 4,000. And the great thing about playing those bigger games with the Kings of War rule set is you quickly get used to the fact that Kings of War lends itself to being quite an efficient, easy to play game. So at big scale, you've got more on the table, but you know the rule structure doesn't necessarily slow you down. It doesn't. You're not hunting through books for rules. So actually, it's just like Steve says, it's a great way just to put all your toys on the table, and it's also a really nice way from my point of view to try out things that I wouldn't normally take. So I took the Ratkin formation with the Death Engine Spewer and the 2 shredders. Had a try with that. Liked some of it, not so sure about others. So I was just really excited.
Just listening to you, they're great points that you make, right? Yeah, Kings of War, because as you say, the rules are so streamlined. I mean, can you just imagine playing this in Warhammer Fantasy? I mean, 3 days later, you're still going, right? Yeah, removing one model at a time, and like God nuts. right? You just
Well,
wouldn't.
literally, I've done some display games back in the day at events in the UK, shows, and we'd done big battles, and literally you'd spend all day playing the game, and you'd be lucky if you got like 2 or 3 turns done.
And your other point is also very good. I never really thought about it. How many of us have got units sitting on our shelves that rarely get played?
We've all got them.
Yep. Exactly, yeah.
And this is now allows you to get it all out there and really enjoy them.
I've got armies on my shelves that I think to the last day. Unless unit.
Yeah, I know the feeling, Steve. I know. As we say in Mantic Universe Podcast, you know, so many universes, so little time. In your case, it's so many armies, so little time. Well, that was a great introduction. Battle commences.
Old Mother Cinderpaw felt a sense of unease in her ancient bones. It had been many years since she and her children had fled the slave pits of Tragar, and so many decisions had been made in that time. So many risks calculated, so many opportunities grasped at. She knew full well that she had made mistakes along the way, whether it was because she had made decisions too quickly or without enough information, but not any big mistakes. She had always trusted the feelings in her bones as the final arbiter in all her decisions, and not once had they screamed so hard at her to abandon any other course of action. Not like they did now. As she looked across the scarred and cratered battlefield, she had to admit there were considerably more orcs standing in front of her than she had been expecting. When the Ratkin had first arrived on the grim plains, with sterile soil and great tracts of green crystalline rock that poisoned the land and made underground exploration all but impossible, they had fought for their survival against the local goblin tribes. Slowly, they had carved out a meagre foothold before eventually squeezing the tribes out of their land. But now the Ratkin needed more resources, which meant fighting the orcs.
Let's talk about the 5,000 point battle that you both had. Eddie, you played Ratkin, Cinderpaw, who was leading your forces, and you were looking after the orcs there, Steve. Can I just start with you, Eddie? What was going through Cinderpaw's mind as her forces were lined up looking at that orc horde on the other side? Were you going, I think we've picked a bad day, or we should have, you know?
There was definitely a lot of empathy. Orcs are one of the armies that I have a very particular reaction to when I see them on the table, because they've got those really large footprints on their bases. And Steve has got a lot of infantry in his collection. A lot of gore riders. So I was looking at were we playing on a 10 by 4 foot table?
Yeah, it was 10 by 4.
So I was literally looking at a 10-foot table that had pretty much solid orc ranks. And my rats only sort of went 2/3 of the table up. And I definitely looked at an army which I find quite imposing anyway, that looked visibly imposing on the tabletop because of the stuff that was there. And it's the way that I write my battle reports. I tend to I have an idea of the starting place, but the battle and the game is what drives everything in the story around the outcomes and what people feel about it. And yeah, definitely when it comes to what Mother Cinderpaw was feeling, it very much reflected my feeling of being sat there looking at 10 feet of orc ranks.
I got the sense, listening to the story, that really it was a case of this was going to be a do or die moment for the Ratkin, right, for Cinderpaw. So, Steve, what was going through the orc general's mind?
Crudger Hackbeard. Oh, what was going through his mind? Well,
excitement.
Fighting, punching, killing.
Were they insulted by the Ratkin being there, or was it just another day, another battle, a new threat? We'll take care of this just like we did the last lot.
Exactly what they were thinking.
Progress had been slow. The orcs were determined opponents, but Cinderpaw knew the mettle of her race. Born into squalid slave pits, they had risen up and overcome, and whilst the barren land they stood on could only be valued by any other race as something to be fought over, for her, it represented freedom. The freedom to do as she pleased. The freedom to gnaw her mark into the world's face. And for all that, she needed an army. For an army, she needed a clan. And for a clan, she needed resources and just the right amount of stability. It was the need for stability that had finally forced her to take the decision to march on the Orc encampment. Stability and an intelligence report from a particularly ambitious birthing daughter. The report had suggested the Orcs had taken massive casualties in a series of recent skirmishes and were now a significantly diminished threat. Something in her bones had told her she should wait for her trusted master Scurrier to confirm the birthing daughter's claims, but the cult of the survivalists was starting to grow again within the clan, and whilst no single ratkin would be stupid enough to openly call for a change in leadership, the survivalists would do what they perceived to be the right thing for the survival of the clan, regardless of how ill-informed and short-sighted. She knew only too well how easily some ratkin could be manipulated. After all, it had been her who had founded the original incarnation of the cult, drawing her most loyal lieutenants from it before disbanding it in a night of frenzied bloodletting after it had outlived its usefulness. The chant rose in the ranks of the warriors and wretches to Cinderpaw's right. She shuddered. The ratkin in these horde packs still flew the red and bone flags of the clan. The colours had been adopted after the original survivalist uprising that had secured her grip on power. They were chosen to remind the clan of the years of starvation they had faced, which had forced them to survive off their own kind. Specifically, those who had even the vaguest of difference of opinion to Cinderpaw. The colours represented the bone farms, where the survivalists had undertaken the bloody work necessary to ensure those loyal to the clan. However, she had noticed that the new survivalists had taken to tattooing their hands red, which had made it relatively straightforward to see how rapidly the cult was growing once again. What she had not been able to ascertain was who was behind the resurgence. When the reports had started to arrive that the Orcs were weakening, she immediately recognised the opportunity it represented. A decisive victory over the Orcs would secure the clan new resources and buy her time to root out whoever was responsible for the renewal. Casting her withered gaze across the wall of angry green muscle and blood-encrusted weapons that now faced the clan, she could not help but wonder if the reports the birthing daughter had brought to her had been tampered with or simply invented. Had someone else realised what weakened Orc tribes would mean to her? Had someone else presented her with a decision she could not afford not to make? There was, however, no going back now.
What were some of the highs and lows during these first two turns, Eddie?
I think I had a couple of good little double one moments. I seem to remember there was a couple of double ones that happened in the cavalry section, a double one on one of Steve's units, which actually ended up playing out quite nicely for me in the next couple of turns. And I also started to make some headway in the centre as well. So I think from my point of view, again, sort of living through Cinderpaw at this stage, there was a bit of relief that was coming over that, you know what, I might be here, I might be in front of all these Orcs, but even if it was the worst decision, maybe I shouldn't have taken it, might be a glimmer of hope. There was a moment of positivity that was spreading inside of me. Maybe the Orcs will slow down. Very happily, the little formation, the Shredders managed to waver a Orkling regiment, which held up a horde of Great Axe. So anything that stops a horde of Great Axe moving for a turn is a massive relief. There was nothing specific, just little triumphs like that on the early days, which just kind of made you go, okay, mate, this isn't the ideal situation, but
we could
maybe
pull this off. We could pull this off. Yeah, absolutely. So Singapore, I mean, from my sense of the story up to this point, I'm getting a sense that there's a power play happening here. So she's facing more than the threat of the orcs. She's facing possibly an internal revolt as well, but she's not sure, and we'll find out in the storyline how that actually develops.
Putting aside the deep-rooted uncertainty that was now starting to gnaw away at her, Cinderpaw unleashed a barrage of lightning bolts at the Long Axe regiment that stood in front of her, splitting the tension that had been building up between the two armies as they waited for the battle to begin, and signalling the Ratkin advance. The Scurriers, who had slipped ahead of the main battle line, sent a volley of shots into some nearby skulks, and they ran from the battlefield. On the Ratkin's left flank, the cavalry advanced cautiously, not wanting to get drawn into an unrewarding combat with the mounted skulks and the crushers that would leave them easy prey for the Gore Riders hiding behind the hill. Spawn released his own lightning bolts at the massive Gore riding orc at the centre of the cavalry, but to little real avail. Seeing the lightning bolts flicker across the sky and ground themselves through Gak, Whip hexed the towering aberration before it could cause any more real damage. The Gore Riders spurred their mounts and started off over and around the hill. Seeing the size of the threat that had been hidden from them until now, the Hackpaws charged into the screen of skirmishers, knowing they had to clear a path for the tunnel runners. The charges hit hard, a crusher was wavered, and a troop of mounted skulks bore so much damage that it seemed unbelievable that if they continued to stand, let alone fight back. Fortunately for the Ratkin though, the sheer volume of angry Gores and even angrier Orc riders on the left flank made it difficult for them to manoeuvre off the hill. The Crusher managed to pull away from the Hackpaws that had attacked him, allowing one regiment of Gore riders to charge the Rat riders, but the charge failed to send them from the battlefield. The miracle survival of the Skulks meant the Gore riders behind them, including the lightning-singed Gak, were blocked up and unable to reach a combat. The chaos this was causing on the hill as the frustrated beasts milled her out, desperate to enter the brawl, spread into a third regiment coming around the hill as they charged the Night Terror. Despite the number of Orcish lancers finding their target, the Terror managed to overcome its injuries and fight back, knocking two riders from their saddles and eviscerating them with its long claws in the process. In the centre, the Orcs pushed forward, keen to get to grips with their enemy and unwilling to let anyone more of their number be lost to the shooting. Towering over the long axe she had blasted with her lightning bolt stood the Orc Crudger Hackbeard and his slasher mount Puff. The pair made for an imposing sight. Cinderpaw eyed the monstrosity and its rider. She had heard much about the ruthless warrior, but all those things paled now. She stood so close to them. Their stench was overpowering. Even at this distance, even for Orcs. The slasher began to heave as though it was attempting to breathe fire, which made Cinderpaw wonder if in fact it could breathe fire, although she understood these creatures could not. Her question was answered a moment later when the monster half vomited, half choked up a sheet of bloody mucus which covered the Long Axe regiment that stood in front of it. Cinderpaw's attention was drawn to a series of open wounds and twisted scar tissue that ran down the one side of Puff's thick neck and a broken spear end Hackbeard held in one hand on the same side. Her questions were answered. The Long Axe pressed forward regardless. Without hesitation, the Vermintide Legion swarmed towards them, supported by the Impaler, the mutilated Night Terror that served as its engine, pumping its severed limbs for all it was worth. The rats collided with the Long Axe. Spinning blades ground into them at head height, whilst the Vermintide ran around their feet, up their legs and under their armour. Seconds later, the regiment had been reduced to red pulp. Or began to wonder if she had underestimated the strength of her own forces rather than that of her enemy. And on the right flank, the Ratkins still held, uncertain of the size of the force they faced due to the hills and the standing stones that obscured the Orcish line.
So, Steve, the Ratkin have had some successes on the battlefield. Tell us about the highs and lows. Was it a smashing turn 1 and 2 as you anticipate?
No, not at all, to be honest. On the cavalry flank, where I was facing off against Scurd and the Wills, the Hackpaws, I got really bogged down with my cavalry. I had said with a couple of, he had a nasty double one there that ended up clogging my lines up a bit more than I would have hoped. And it was actually a double one of my own units. I was expecting it to die, so I set up for the charges and the counter charges, and then they didn't die. It was like, oh, brilliant. So that flank wasn't going very well. The centre was okay, but not much was happening. The only flank, I had about a little mishap with the Orklins in the first turn would be my left flank. But the rest of that flank was about the only positive that I had at that point. Was Ed had held back a lot. He couldn't really cover it with the troops I had on the left flank. So I was starting to make inroads on that flank there.
Let's have a listen to what actually happens in turn 3 and 4.
As the last of the long axe disappeared under the sea of vermin, the battle lines began to meet in other places across the battlefield. Hackbeard goaded Puff forward, and together with the fight wagons crashed into the Impaler, whilst the giant that had been closest to them grabbed at one of the weapons teams that blocked it from getting to the shock troops and hurled it out of the way. The weapon and its crew exploded in a spectacular cloud of noxious green smoke several hundred metres from the back of the Ratkin lines as they hit the ground. The shock troops charged the giant in response, but despite causing grievous wounds to it, some losing the grip on their weapons so slicked they became with the giant's blood, it refused to die. The unrelenting advance of the mass ranks of orc infantry in the centre put a massive pressure on the Ratkin there. Despite the centre being held by experienced and elite warriors, their well-drilled tactics, combining ranged fire with waves of chaff and plague pots to distract and whittle down the enemy advance, simply wasn't working. Although a lone war chief managed to successfully hold a horde of trolls at bay, bad shooting or just plain bad luck meant the troops of Morax refused to succumb to the scurrier's volleys, pressing forward and finding their way into the flanks of veteran hordes. The berserkers caught the preoccupied warriors off guard and caused massive amounts of damage that saw both the nightmares and the shock troop horde fighting the giant dissolve. The fog of war surrounding her, uncertain as to how the battle was unfolding, Cinderpaw herself launched at Hackbeard. Puff sensed the cold, wilting air around her and instinctively drew his head back, inadvertently exposing his damaged neck. Cinderpaw thrust the sharp end of her rotting staff into one of the beast's open wounds and pushed with all her might. She felt the creature wince and then convulse. A choking, spluttering bark erupted from his throat, and Cinderpaw felt the warm weight of bloody mucus land on her. The disgusting slime covered her from head to toe, momentarily blinding her and resulting in her next blow going wide of its mark. Hackbeard had always been scornful of the wiry old rat witch, even more so after what the witch's traitor had told him. Whilst he did not doubt she had some talents, he had not expected the decrepit-looking, almost corpse-like creature to have any sort of fight in her. He could feel the unsettling stench of archaic death permeating the air around him, even in the heat of battle, and the viciousness with which she had lashed out at Puff made him reevaluate his perceived one-sidedness of the duel. As the old rat thrashed about, attempting to alleviate her temporary blindness, the wily Crudger took the opportunity to look for an alternative fight, one where he might better find odds. Seeing a horde of spear rats in the woods just beyond, with their flank turned to him, he directed Puff towards them. Despite her confusion, Cinderpaw felt the downward rush of air as Puff flexed his wings to leap over her. In amongst the darkness and the rush of air, she heard the unmistakable sound of a fight wagon barreling towards her through the woods to her left. The fight wagons had become embroiled in a fight with the Impaler before becoming the target of shooting. Heavily damaged, only one of the contraptions remained, and it struck her, but a collection of roots had wound themselves around the wheels and slowed it to the point that whilst the impact looked impressive, the loud crunching sound it created came from the axles detaching itself from inside the wagon. The body of the wagon, together with the orc crew, then flew backwards into the faces of the gores that pushed them. Cinderpaw gave a wicked smile as she surveyed the wreckage at her feet. Maybe, she thought to herself. On the left flank, the Gore Riders had finally broken through the regiments of Hackpaws and Vermintide that had held them up. They bellowed out challenges to the tunnel runners and the spawn beyond, bloodied weapons raised above their heads. Despite the massive spawn bolstering the charioteers' confidence, the number of Gore Riders and a wave of Morax behind the bolstering charioteers' confidence, the number of Gore Riders and a wave of Morax behind them made the outcome of the combats to come far from certain. As the charioteers readied themselves, a burst of shots flew from the Death Spear in the centre of the field and tore into the Morax. As the smoke cleared, it became apparent that the Death Spear had managed to wipe out the troop to an orc. Emboldened, the Spawn and the Tunnel Runners charged. The Spawn landed in front of the Gore Riders to the furthest left on the very end of the line. His heavy sword fell, unseating orcs and spreading terror, but not quite forcing them from the field. The Tunnel Runner regiments charged a second Gore Rider regiment that had positioned itself awkwardly on the hill. Despite the regiment being swiftly dispatched, the subsequent attempts by the Tunnel Runners to reform for the next charge resulted in the remaining unengaged Gore Rider regiment catching the flank of one unit of chariots and swiftly routing it. Suddenly, the brief window of opportunity the successful destruction of the Morax had opened seemed to be slamming shut.
Eddie, Singapore's got a bit of uncertainty starting to gnaw away at her.
This is when the fun starts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma going on.
Yep. A lot of trauma.
A lot of dice-based trauma, particularly.
So I want to hear about that trauma. Eddie. Let's hear a bit about Gakamak, because obviously he threw his weight around.
Ed loves Gakamaki.
Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't.
I'm Brandon Rossbond of Winged Hussar Publishing, and you're listening to the Mantic Universe Podcast.
We're right in the thick of battle, so let's go over to the orc side and find out a little bit more detail about what actually happened there.
I was using a couple of the special characters from the orcs, so I was using Gakamak on my right flank with my cavalry. So Ed really enjoys Gakamak and all that he does, and he has some good fun running around and almost taking out units by himself, blocking up units, leading the orc cavalry charge.
Eddie, did you want to say something about that? Because obviously you have a love for Gakamak, says Steve.
I believe this is a family show, so I won't be saying anything.
I was getting a bit held up on the old cavalry flank a little bit. If it wasn't for Gak, I could have been in a lot of trouble at this point, but he was holding them to get that flank together. It wasn't going as well as what I was hoping. But the other flank, as I said earlier on, I was really pushing in now, and I managed to swing the Great Axe horde and one of my giants. I think it was I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Lars. So I got both my giants are named after a podcast, the now defunct Giant Dwarf podcast. So one of them's Fred and one of them's Lars. So I picked that up due to the fact that I think it's Fred had an orc army, and he actually had the model that I use for my orcs. It's actually a toy. I can't remember which company it comes from. It's one of the big 54 mil or whatever toy orcs. When I was putting my orcs together, so I sourced a couple of them myself. So I thought I'd always name those giants. Then smashed into your one of your hordes of shock troops, I think.
Yep.
And that's when we had another incident with the
Double
old double one. Didn't we? Did you devastate poor Fred?
Oh, that was the turn that, yeah, we had the double one. We had the the two troops of Morax that should have been shot off the table, but weren't. Those were I needed a 3 on both of those, which then opened up flanks.
So, dear listener, if you're wondering what's happening here, Eddie is now going through his lows.
I think that's all there is, though.
Well, I'm sure it isn't, Eddie. Come on, there must have been some highs. I mean, you might have been pushing back somewhere along the line. I mean, were you holding anything back?
Only the cavalry. The cavalry was going all right.
Well, Singapore wasn't doing too bad, was she? Her and Hackbeard had clashed in the centre.
Yes and no. Because she managed, the Turn 3, she went into Hackbeard and managed to keep him down and did quite a bit of damage.
Yeah.
Turn 4,
She blubbed.
she failed to hit him. So
Well, that was because Puff like sneezed on her though, didn't he? That's what it was.
Exactly.
Steve, I love sometimes, these characters that are in our narrative games, where their names are totally understated in terms of what they can actually do, right? Yeah. I'm sure that Hackbeard and Puff sort of like were doing a lot of damage on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So tell me about all this lightning that's going off all over the place. Who's causing all this lightning? From which side is this coming?
Coming from the rats, the filthy rats.
Always from the rats. It was Chrysler. I took actually quite unusually for me. I quite like my lightning bolt, but I didn't take very much, and it was mainly just Chrysler putting her lightning bolts out. Scud got hexed early on, so, that put a stop to that.
By the sound of it, you had more troops on the ground than
basically my list,
so you couldn't get around your flanks, right?
I think on my list I had no magical items at all. It was just troops. So I'd only taken the one actual infantry horde. Everything else is regiments of troops. So I had lots of like infantry regiments, axe, long axe, and then lots of more axe troops, which were absolutely fantastic. And the new standard bearer. Oh,
yeah, that is great, isn't it?
Hideous.
We don't talk points in this game, right? But if we were, we'd say, "Wow, that's a gift," right?
Well, I think a couple of troops of Morax just went through Ed's centre like hot knife through butter, literally, because they were surrounded by the standard bearer and other troops and regiments at the time. I was getting like, because there was no maximum, so I was getting like +5. I was getting like 20.
Yeah, extra attack dice. Yeah.
Then you hit a flank, so you're like 40 attack dice going in. I think against your nightmare, Ed, or something? I hit a flank, didn't I?
You got my shock troops. You got my nightmares. You got.
It was just this one unit of Morax, wasn't it? It was literally just brutalising. And anything they touched, it was just like dying. It was just absolutely mental.
So, Eddie, I'm sorry we're reliving your pain there, but I'm now going to come to you. Obviously, Singapore's now really starting to think about, I'm committed and I don't know where this is going to go. Let's have a listen to the last 2 turns of the game.
The orcs on the right flank had been advancing slowly, held up by the forests, hills and uneven stretches of scrubland. Singapour had hoped to take advantage of the terrain on the right of the battlefield to buy her time to overrun the centre and establish a rally point around the encampment before the orc reinforcements could join battle. With the centre lost to the rats, the rally point had never materialised, and now the troops on the right flank were scrabbling to mount some sort of defence. Orc infantry and a giant were making their way through the woods in front of the encampment, whilst regiments of chariots had crested the hill and were now within easy distance of the remaining ratkin. Hackbeard's arrival had thrown the flank into disarray, forcing a horde of spears to turn their back on the chariots to deal with the new threat. Despite the damage that Singapour had inflicted on the beast, the confusion resulting from the direction of his attack meant the spear-armed warriors were in no position to capitalise on it, and spear tips flew wide of their mark. As the rat warriors did their best to fend off the Crudger, the orc chariots prepared to charge. At the Birthing Daughter's command, a horde of wretches flooded into the side of an axe regiment that, together with the giant, were engaged with the Vermintide Legion. Despite the weight of numbers, the rats were in simply no match for the brutal orcs and their towering companion. Singapour looked across to see the wretches and the Vermintide fleeing, leaving only a lonely shock troop horde that had been in reserve as the only chance to stop the onslaught. Unaware of the failure in the centre, and now seeing the right flank overrun, Singapour turned to see what support she could offer the shock troops. Distracted, she did not see the Morax mansplitter bearing down on her and offered no defence as the reckless berserker swung repeatedly at her, each axe blow landing with a sickening crack, splitting flesh, breaking bone and driving the withered matriarch to the ground. Awareness of Singapour's demise spread almost instinctively through the remnants of the Ratkin on the right flank and in the centre, and discipline broke down completely and the army fled. Only on the left flank did the fighting continue. The spawn swung again at the wavered Gore Riders, finally putting them to flight, only to be charged by both Gak and the remaining Crusher. The two champions lashed out with an almost superhuman rage, raining great wounds in the creature. Supported by their swarm crier, the remaining tunnel runners surged into the last of the Gore Riders. And such was their ferocity of their charge, not only did they wipe out the Gore Riders, but also overran into the Crusher, who had attempted to stop them from interfering with the combat between the spawn and Gak, and then trampled Gak. As the spawn surveyed the carnage, the charioteers had left behind them, with grim glee, a single lightning bolt shot from Whip's direction. It struck the beast directly between the eyes, and the creature went still before collapsing to the ground. For the first time, the chariots turned their attention to the rest of the battlefield. Despite their hard-won victory, they knew immediately that there would be no celebrations as they saw the piles of dead that littered the plain, far too many of which they recognised as their own brothers and sisters.
Let's get back to the generals.
The centre at this point was going smashingly, shall we say. Especially with Sinderpool missing Beard. And he was free to roam, and what was over the horizon? The flank of a horde of spear rats. Oh, sweet! Off he went to cause a mischief. Oh, my Morax troops were amazing. As I said, with the standard bearer, the new orc standard bearer. Oh, boosting them, giving them the rampage 1 for every unit that's within 6. Yeah. Oh. Couple of flank charges by some troops of Moraxes into a couple of edits units was lovely, beautiful.
Well, I'm now going to go to the other side, and Eddie, we're going to talk about we're going to talk about the pressures you were feeling at this point in time. So please tell us.
I think, as Steve said, I think the collapse in the centre from a rash of very unfortunate rolls on turn 4 just kind of secured the direction of travel, I think, for the rest of the game. There was no coming back from that. But I think, one of the things about running through a narrative and trying to pick out the story that you're going to write for the battle, because I think I always try to write, always try to find the story arc that's going to carry the army through the battle, the characters through the battle. And I think the dice and the game is what makes the decision of how that's going to go. And I think for me, coming into the game, coming into the story, I have a blank sheet of paper. I have a view that I know there's going to be a fight. I know the reason why the fight's happening. But as I was starting to watch the army disintegrate, it sort of started to become apparent to me that maybe there's something more than fate at work here. Maybe there's a reason why those units are suddenly disintegrating, why the fight isn't being pushed quite as hard as you'd expect it to be, or you would hope it to be. So I think at this point in the game, from a narrative point of view, I was very much in a place where there was definitely some underhand schemes at play. Sinderpool is still hanging on to life. The other great thing that I think double ones and those low dice give you, and those surprising moments that the dice give you, it gives you an opportunity to explain it and to find a little vignette, a little story as to what actually happened. So I think for me, there's a couple of my favorite bits of writing this up. One was the detail around Puff and Puff's neck and his breath weapon in inverted commas, and the other is around the fight wagons and sort of what happened with them. And in that case, they were very badly wounded. They flank charged Sinderpool, double wand against Sinderpool, and then she turned round and possibly with only one attack hitting.
Then she was distracted by the fight wagons. It's all part of the cunning plan.
Let's hear about this cunning plan.
Distracted by the fight wagons, so the man-eater could come in and finish the job.
Eddie, you make a really good point. Narrative games, they don't stop when you roll double ones, right? Yeah, the storyline just takes a left-hand turn, right-hand turn. You may be on the losing end, but you're actually winning because a narrative gamer is enjoying the storyline. It may not be the way that you wanted it to go, but you play to the last turn.
Dying fires offered their last light to the night as the first hint of dawn's arrival crept across the battlefield. The sounds of celebration had echoed across the plains for many hours until the orcs had finally drunk more than even their vast thirsts could handle. The birthing daughter picked her way carefully across the battlefield, the corpse mountains providing sufficient cover for her not to worry too much about being discovered. Led by an amulet that aided her in searching for what she most desired, she quickly found the crumpled body of Cinderpaw. She paused for a moment as she took in just how fragile the old ratkin was. Her desiccated limbs were shattered. The birthing daughter drew in a quick breath. Where was it? She rooted around frantically, overturning corpses and scratching at the dark earth until her fingers started to bleed.
Looking for this,
Hackbeard rumbled as he stepped out from behind a tree. The birthing daughter froze before slowly turning to face the massive Crudger.
She was a strong enemy, stronger than you had me believe. You won the day?
The birthing daughter retorted defensively.
Now give me what's mine.
The Crudger threw a ball of bloody cloth towards the birthing daughter.
It's all yours.
The birthing daughter reached out a hand, fresh red tattooing etched into her skin.
I'll never understand your race's obsession of making helmets out of your rivals' skulls.
The Grudge crumbled.
It's symbolic.
The birthing daughter snapped back, taking hold of the bundle.
I hope for your sake it's more than symbolic. A weaker one than her won't last long on my plains.
Hackbeard sneered as the birthing daughter disappeared without another word or a backward glance into the new dawn.
Something's been revealed. There's been some sort of collusion between the orcs and part of the Ratkin army.
One of the interesting things I think about narrative gaming is when you get to the end and you've got your body count, who's surviving, who's not surviving. And I think for this story, because for me coming into this story, it was all about there is some stuff going on under the surface of the clan. There's a potential leadership challenge. I basically decided whatever happens in the game, that's what's going to happen for the clan. So the birthing daughter survived the battle. Cinderpaw didn't. And it turns out that the birthing daughter had quite a lot to do with the collapse in the center and driving Cinderpaw's decision to go into the combat in the first place. And may have even tipped off the orcs about the Ratkin making their way towards the village.
What was it that the birthing daughter was looking for at the end of the battle? What was so important about what she was searching for, and what was the significance in what the orc leader, the Crudger, said to her?
There's a really nice bit of Ratkin lore. I really like a lot of the Ratkin lore that's available so far, but there's a really nice piece around shock troops. How if you want to be a shock troop as a young rat, you've got to beat a current shock troop, and then once you've killed them, you take the skull and turn the skull into a helmet. And I love this concept, and it made me wonder if this is maybe something that is done more widely through kind of Ratkin culture. And there is actually a warlock model. The warlock model has got a rat skull on top of his head. And I thought, you know what, this would be a nice thing to bring in here, because I think that Ratkin are clever. I think they're cunning. I think they use a lot of as much psychological sort of forms of warfare and control as they do physical ones. And so for me, the way that I see it is that the birthing daughter is kind of enacting that symbolism of, this was the clan's leader, she's now dead, I've taken her skull. And it's a nice subtle nod to maybe not saying, do you know what, I was quite treacherous and kind of really played a lot to make sure the battle was lost. However, I have got her skull. I beat her.
Yep.
I did it.
Yeah.
I'm your new boss.
From the other side, the Crudger obviously says, I hope for your sake it's more than symbolic. A weaker than her won't last long on my plains.
From Hackbeard's point of view, he's not made an alliance with her, and they're still very much at war. And it's kind of a, enjoy your moment of peace.
There's more games coming. By the sound of it, Steve, you're going to probably paint up a few more flag bearers, and pack more axes around them.
That's all it's going to be, more
I've
axes
actually
and
got
flags.
some more. I want to do a fight wagon legion at some point, so I've got the models for it.
Statline's got you down? You like stories? Check out MUPLore with Walt and crew.
Eddie, Steve, it's been great talking to both of you. It's great to hear the orcs and the rack and, getting stuck into each other. And it sounded to me like it could have gone either way. And it sounded like you guys had a lot of fun. But before we close, let's hear a little bit about yourselves.
Lazy Pirate Painting. That's my YouTube channel. I started it a few years ago, mainly just to record the games I play and the armies I build and stuff like that, just to have a little bit of a record. So,
Steve, I'm in total awe of you. First of all, you've come up with a really cool name. Second thing is, I've never met a pirate before.
You now have.
Yeah, I did. Correct. Good on you. Excellent. Eddie, you are a story writer as well, and you've got a blog out there. Tell us all about that as well, and a podcast too, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah.
No, I don't have a podcast.
Not yet. Well, you should.
Maybe in the future. But no, so I have my blog, which is thewizardsbookshelf.com. It's linked to a website, which is a bit of a hobby dump, to be quite honest. So it's a lot of tournament reports, some narrative stuff. There's some short story stuff in there, book reviews, all kinds of stuff that I just do and think, right, let's write about it. That's fine. I'm a TO as well, so I run the Southwest Clash, which is 2-day GT down in Bristol, UK. That's in July this year, so if there's anyone who fancies a ticket,
okay,
there's 8 tickets left. If this goes out before the 20th of July. Finally, I am an aspiring indie author. I published my first book a couple of years ago now. It's called The Rose of Amzar. It's available on Amazon, and it's basically it's a fantasy adventure story set in my own world, my own little space. It's very good. Lots of really good reviews. Check it out.
Excellent. Right.
And,
well, this is great.
That's me, basically.
Yeah. Well, I tell us the name of that book again. Come on, Eddie.
It's The Rose of Amzar, AMZHARR.
I'm going to go and get it. Look, it's been a real privilege having both of you on here. Very honoured to have you on the podcast. So I'm going to go to you, Steve, for any last comments. Anything you want to get off your chest, do it now.
No.
All right. Eddie?
Just a massive thanks for having us on. It's been really good fun. Good to talk through the game again, and looking forward to hearing the story with the voice actors. Definitely.
Yes, actually, yes.
Wow.
That is going to be I've listened to all the episodes of MUPLore so far.
Yeah.
And the voice acting is
it really brings things to life.
It really
it's
is.
great.
It's fantastic.
It is one of our highlights. It was always our plan to do that. to get storytelling to bring to the fore.
I still can't believe you let Danny on the show, though. You know.
Danny, if you're listening, don't listen to what Steve's got to say. Don't get upset. Don't upset him, Steve. no, he's a good man. So
he is a very good man indeed.
Are you bored of talking about stat lines? Listen to MUPLore with Walt.
Thank you for coming onto the show, and also thank you for your kind words as well. And for those people who are listening to MUPLore for the first time, there's more of this. There are 1,000 stories to tell, and we'd love to air your story. Gentlemen, it's time for you to go to bed and for me to start my day. I thank you. I hope that you'll come onto the show again.
Certainly will.
Okay.
Look after Walt.
Thanks.
Really good to speak to you.
Okay, thank you. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye now.
Cheers.
I'm not so sure about this place.
We'll be lucky to get out of here alive, I reckon. Where's Mark?
I'm right here, hanging upside down. Some bog vines got me sprung up here. Cut me down, will ya? Oh, and try not to cut off my leg.
Oh, what was that?
Where's Gad?
He's looking after the pack mules. Well, was.
Blimey. Fish food.
Look, the clearing.
Ruins!
Hey, there's the door. Let's go.
Hang on! Mark!
Wrong door, obviously.
Anyone there?
Welcome, strangers. You have reached the Dark Library of Knowledge, the Pannithor, Kings of Wiki. My master awaits. Please, watch your step.
Hi, Dave. We've just been listening to Eddie and Steve, so I thought I'd come to you as the Pannithor Wiki Master, and I'd like to ask you some questions. What deep, dark secrets and lost lore can you share with us about the Ratkin?
All right, so the Ratkin, most people know that they didn't actually come from the Abyss themselves. They were actually created by the Abyssal Dwarfs. So they kind of were an experiment similar to orcs. They were kind of constructed and kind of bred. And due to that, the lore of the Ratkin are kind of a little bit unwritten. They do try and replicate the Abyss. They still kind of idolize the Abyss. So their nests comprise of the same amount of 7 levels as the Abyss. So they've got 7 levels, with the 7th one kind of entering into kind of Abyss territory. So they are recognized as evil, but whether they're actually evil or not, there's a lot of sense in the community we don't know. We don't really know what their ultimate goal is, or what their really intentions are now they're free and not slaves anymore. Their race name is actually Gnor. A lot of people call them Ratkin. That's actually the faction name, because that's a composition of 3 different races, but the Ratkin themselves are called the Gnor. So there's about 4 different races of Ratkin. There's Gnor, there are Brutes, there are Rat Fiends, and then there are Night Terrors. So they all comprise of the Ratkin faction, but when you start to cut them down, you've got the Gnor is the primary ones everyone knows about. And the most famous, actually, I would say he's more of a Brute, but it's not really defined whether he's a Brute or he's a Gnor, is Vorik. So Vorik is a Ratkin leader who rebelled against the Abyssal Dwarfs. He's one of the first war chiefs declared by the Tangle. So the Tangle's kind of their shrine, or their kind of magical kind of shrine that kind of it doesn't really specify exactly what it does, but it's something that the Rat can idolize, that kind of chooses their leaders. So there aren't too many stories about Vorik other than he rebelled, got declared as the war chief, and that's pretty much it. So there's a lot of potential of really filling the blanks here.
And for the orcs, what lost knowledge is there to learn about the orcs, Dave?
All right, so for the orcs, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to the first edition. So in the first edition, now this doesn't mean it's canon. This is just what it said in the first edition of Kings of War, that there were 4 different subspecies of orc. So there was something called the Urkin, so that's Urkin. There are half orcs, there are greater goblins, and there was hobgoblins. Now it doesn't go into detail what each one of them were, But if you keep in mind that the orcs were experiments of Gark the Black, which is the Wicked One in the Abyss, and the Abyss time, actually, if we learn what we learned from the Riftforge orc lore, it goes a lot slower. Time goes slower, so years could actually pass by in there and only days up on the surface. So whether Yurikan and half goblins are actually just failed experiments of the Wicked Ones, or they're actually just something they threw in there. I mean, logically, they just threw it in there, didn't think too much of it, threw it at the wall, and we never heard from them again. But there is a potential they could be brought back into actually canon. So what does a failed experiment of the Wicked Ones look like? And that's what will actually open up a lot of story opportunities if you kind of think about with some evil people that would make orcs, if they made a failed experiment of an orc, what does that look like? Does that mean good orcs? Does that mean maybe more elf more less chaotic kind of orcs? So what does an army of orcs who are actually composed and society kind of structured and kind of more well put together? And on that note, the book, first novelization of some orcs is coming out called Claws of the Plain later this year. That's by Wanniassa Publishing. So keep an eye out for that.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm sure 99% of us didn't even know that was coming. Is that available for pre-order, Dave?
Yeah, it's available pre-order on Wanniassa's website. So check it out. I've heard some good things so far.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks, Dave. We're going to come back to you in following episodes. So until next time, thank you so much.
No worries.
We're now going to switch from the Northern Hemisphere back down to the Southern Hemisphere, where I'm going to speak to a good friend of mine, and that's Jats. Hello, how are you doing?
I am well this morning, or this afternoon, should I say. It's a bit brisk in Canberra, but it is winter after all.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's not like the UK. I mean, they're running around in shorts and thongs and drinking beer. It must be their summertime. So, Jets, let's talk about what's happening in Canberra. There's a big storyline that actually the backdrop to a tournament that's about to kick off. Do you want to tell us about all of that?
On the 20th of July, we've got a tournament in chilly Canberra. And we're wrapping the classic North versus South, which I'm not sure if every town and city has, but we certainly do. We've got 6 scenarios to play of an ambush tournament, with the storyline running that the South will rise against the mighty North and try and knock them off their throne from last year when the North managed to win the Civil War tournament. We've got 6 games and a flowing storyline through them all. I'm not much of a narrative player generally, but I know that people are, and this tournament's certainly to cater for multiple tastes as a good intro for people into the Kings of War tournament scene.
Yeah, well, that's great news. A lot of narrative players are actually being attracted to Kings of War, and I'm starting to get a sense that a lot more narrative is creeping into a lot of the tournament play as well.
Give you sort of the rundown of the 6 scenarios and how they all tie in together, and if those tournament players are listening to this, they'll get a good vibe for what sort of scenarios we'll be playing for the tournament. So a bit of a spoiler for them, I suppose.
There you go. There's the payoff. You listen to MUPLore and you're ahead of the game already.
Invading is the best form of defence, and it's a solid offence. So the South has decided to rise up against the Northern oppressors. After a year of torment and ridicule, the South of Canberra has decided enough is enough. Ambushes on the North have commenced, as has civil war. We've got that sort of jovialness between North and South here in Canberra. It's all in good fun, and you are out of staters there, Walt. You can join in and be the British, so to speak, and try and pick which side you want to be on this time.
I prefer to be on the winning side, but that tends to be not the case 99% of the time. Has the South ever beaten the North?
Well, we have a lot of strong northern competitors, I would say, in the Kings of War scene here in Canberra. And there are a few, I think Matt lives down in the south, who you might know from the Countercharge podcast. But then he works in the north, so is he really a southerner? I'm not sure. I think our current master lives up north, the very tippity top of the north.
So Matt from Countercharge could be a bit of a fifth column. Is that what you're telling me? Is that are we going live with that news or?
I can't remember which way he pledged his allegiance for this one, but we'll see.
Can you tell us a little bit about how big the club is?
So I would say active players probably have a good core of about 15 to 20, but we can certainly branch it out to about 40 players, I reckon, if we really pushed hard.
Do you want to give our store in the south a plug, or including the one in the north if you wanted to?
Yep. So there's basically the two gaming stores in Canberra where I would say that Kings of War is being played. That's Small World's friendly local game store down in the south, and Jolt Games up in the north, and they both do a pretty good job at supporting us in various ways. But certainly for Kings of War, you can only get the product down at that south side store, which is good. Especially the ambush boxes, which seem to have been pretty popular with the folk down there and have drawn a few extra players in. We had a new one rock up last Thursday, and he'd painted his whole army of his ambush box and a monster. So we're really keen to keep encouraging people. Mantic have been very good, supplied us some of the quick rule books, and they've sponsored some of the prizes in this tournament as well coming up, so that's been useful.
If people in Australia, Canberra region, are thinking about coming for a game and they can't quite figure out how to get in contact, just reach out to MUPLore, send us an email, or get onto the Facebook page there, say hello, and I'm sure somebody will come back to you ASAP. Jats, before I leave you, let's talk about you. What are you playing these days?
Basically exclusively Kings of War. So when I'm not playing Kings of War on the alternate Thursdays down at Small Worlds, I'm usually playing board games. My tiny little brain can't do with more than one rule set, so I have dabbled in some of the other ones along the way. I got some Armada stuff, and certainly with the Vault, being able to print a lot of the Armada stuff is spectacular.
What's your favourite army in Kings of War?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know if I have a favourite. So I've got the 4 armies myself. I've got started with the Ogres, which I ported across from Warhammer, and then I went to a Mantic army. I'm not sure if anyone on MUPLore would have seen, but I actually did a Pokemon army first as an Abyss army, which got some mixed reviews. But then I actually purchased the Mantic version of the Abyss army and ran that as well. And then I managed to, there's a beautiful painter in Canberra by the name of Patch, you might have come across, and he was getting rid of a Dwarf army. So I sort of tripped and fell and bought a Dwarf army as well. But I generally play an army for a couple of years and then put it away and then pull out the next army and then come back to it, I suppose, now in an 8-year cycle that I've got the Trident Realms, which I purely put together mostly because of the speed paint revolution, and I just actually became keen on painting again, which I've never really been. But I'm a big fan of trying to get people into the hobby, and I think the only way to really do that is to be at a club and showing off the product that we've got and the community that we've got. So that presents the biggest challenge, I think, for us going forward.
Yeah. Jats, before we go, you're the tournament organizer for this tournament. Is there anybody else helping you with that organisation, or is it just you?
It's an army of people. So we've got the Canberra Wargamer Association that provides a lot of advice, terrain, game mats and things like that. I was trying to do some costings for some game mats, and I think it takes a group. By the time you need all the terrain, you need all the mats, you all come together and you help each other out and build some infrastructure for the future. So I've got some table numbers that I've purchased for this one, which we can start rolling onto all the tournaments just to make things a little bit easier to find when you go. And I've tried to engage with a lot of local companies too, which has been really good actually. We've had Olympian Games here in Canberra, which does some really nice trophies for us. And they took some of the logos that got made by another local art company I found at the geek markets. And it's just, yeah, it's all been coming together well. And there'll be some nice little loot bags for people that are attending the tournament, which I literally just put together this morning, actually, which I always think if you can walk away with a tournament with a swagger gear and feel like you've had a good time playing 6 games with people, then that's a good day. It'll be on Saturday, the 20th of July, 2024. There'll be 6 games of 750-point ambush. The thought being our big tournament is around that January every year, and after that, we might try and drag some players in. So the best way to start Kings of War, I think, is with ambush. So there's, unlike most tournaments, there is actually no painting requirement for this one. So as long as people have them based, I'm happy. It's all about just getting some new players in. And by the end of 6 games, you should have a pretty good handle of the rule set, I'd say.
Jats, it's been great talking to you. It sounds like you guys are going to have a great time. I hope to be there. Thank you for your time today. And I'd like to have you back on MUPLore and tell us how that story between the North and South eventuates. Maybe the South will get one up on the North. What do you think?
Well, let's hope so. And any of those people that are attending that aren't from north or south of Canberra, don't worry, never fear. You'll just be mercenaries, and we'll just be evening out the sides. So there's no excuses not to come. I'll put you on a side if you can't pick one.
Fantastic, and that includes you, Matt Kroger, if you're listening. Righto. Thanks, Jats. Talk soon.
Thanks, Walt. See ya.
All right.